He has good top end speed, but I'm not going to sit here and say he's DK Metcalf.
I don't want to be like too high of praise, but he feels like he's got the sort of speed of a Jalen Waddle in the body of a CD Lamb.
Now we dive into this year's wide receiver rankings. We're going to do a top 5 again. Keep it at 5. Also, sorry. Well, never mind. We'll just keep going. So I'm going to throw it to you first since I felt like your list was better last year than mine, just objectively. So, Mr. John Harris at number 5, who is your 5th best wide receiver in the 2022 draft class.
My number 5 wide receiver in the 2022 draft class is George Pickens out of Georgia. I'll get the concerns out of the way first. He did tear his ACL this past season and missed most of the year. I think he came back at the very end, but wasn't really able to have a big impact. It sort of felt like he just rushed back because he wanted to be a part of the championship run. And he was important. But overall, I think that his draft stock really just fell because of that injury. I think before the injury, he was actually looking like he was going to be arguably the top receiver of the draft class. He was very impactful his first couple of years in Georgia. He's 6'3". He ran a 4.47 40 time at the combine. And although that's not like blazing fast for a guy of his size, that's pretty solid. So George Pickens, I think that if you take away the injury history, if he can stay healthy at the next level, I really love the potential that he has. I think he's just one of those sort of big body receivers that when you think of big body guys, you think that some people, maybe they lack the speed, they lack the agility. I think that he's a good blend of those things. He's not like off the charts in any of those, but I think he's above average in a lot of those. And so George Pickens, he is my number 5 wide receiver. Once again, I understand anybody who's low on him because of the injury history. A torn ACL in the year before you hit the NFL draft is not ideal because, you know, that's the game film that you really want to see is how he progressed into his final season. But I think that he's just an uber talented receiver, a physical specimen. And if he can put it all together at the NFL level and stay healthy, I think he has immense potential. So George Pickens is my number 5. How about you?
My number 5 is going to be Mr. Treylin Burks out of Arkansas. First off, I mean, obviously the size, I think, jumps out to most people. People want to comp him to DK Metcalf. And I do want to throw out one negative already. He has good top-end speed, but I'm not going to sit here and say he's DK Metcalf where he's going to put the fear of God that he can run past you. I think he has good enough where if he sets you up, which he has good enough route running, I think, especially short route running, where maybe he can set you up to blow by you or the offense can scheme a way for him to get by you. Somehow. Obviously, like I mentioned, the size, big and tough. He has good hands, and with that size, he has pretty good physicality. Like even when he gets the ball, he has not just like afraid of running through people, but also he has enough agility where he can make a guy or two miss or do something with the ball. Give him a screen. He might be able to. He can do some things with that, make it a good play. I feel like his ceiling is like Demarius. He reminds me a lot of like Demarius Thomas-ish. He was also kind of a big receiver who had good enough speed to get by to at least put fear into you, but could do so much more than that. So yeah, that was kind of my comp, was a Demarius Thomas, which I know at 5 is saying a lot because Demarius was a Hall of Famer and such. But at least that's the ceiling. He could be like a Darius Hayward-Bay, who is also ironically in the same draft class where it's a big guy who has trouble separating. But I really think he'll be fine in the NFL. I have end of the first, probably second round kind of grade on Treylin Burks. Obviously, as a Packer fan, I would love for him to come, but we're kind of desperate, so that doesn't really mean anything. But he is my number 5, Treylin Burks out of Arkansas. Now we move to my number 4. We'll do snake draft. It's going to be Mr. Chris Olave out of Ohio State. Probably one of the top, if not the top, one of the top route runners in the class. I wrote down like diet Justin Jefferson. That's no it's no shade on Olave. He may be better at the next level. He may be just like Justin Jefferson. He doesn't have the same physicality as Justin Jefferson, but I don't think that's going to be an issue, especially at the line of scrimmage. I think he has good speed. great with the ball in his hands as well, good agility. But yeah, like I said, size may be a little bit of an issue in certain matchups, but I don't think it's going to be a big issue for him. Big picture, especially with a good offense, they'll figure out ways to. I mean, now most offenses have ways of getting guys free releases without worrying about a jam if they really need to. But once again, I think Alave can be like the Jefferson, mainly work the middle short field, and then occasionally he can set you up for the long bomb. But yeah, like I'm a little bit better than Burks. I feel like there's just a little bit higher of a floor than Treylin Burks. But yeah, I have Alave at 4. What about you, Mr. John? Who do you have as your 4th best wide receiver in the 2022 draft class?
My number 4, also Chris Olave from Ohio State. He's grown on me a bit since the combine. It was tough. So Ohio State was very loaded on offense the last couple of years. And to be honest, because they have 2 great prospects coming out in this year's class, I believe it's Jackson Smith and Jigba is still the wide receiver that's there, and he's going to be coming out next year. I think he's better than both of them. So it was a bit tough for me to really evaluate the wide receiver room at Ohio State just because of how loaded they were. Even Jameson Williams was there for a time, and then he ended up transferring. And Chris Olave, to me, out of most of the guys there, like I said, Jameson Williams, Garrett Wilson, all these guys, he didn't pop as much to me when it came to what I think he can do with the NFL. His 40 time, it was like a 4.39, but there was some controversy at the combine of like, what did he really run? Because his unofficial time was much faster than that, but then his official time came back slower. So maybe there was some clock issues. I don't know what happened. But I think he's a great route runner. He's got really good speed. He can take it over the top, decent size. So I like what he can do at the NFL level. But I don't think that he has like the sort of game-breaking ability, I would say, of my top 3, which is what sort of kept him out of there. I think he's going to be a really great NFL receiver, obviously, and we say this with all of our rankings. There's just sort of a preference that we each have. My top 3, I have this preference that if they get into the right system, I think they can be just crazy elite NFL wide receivers. And Alave, I think that he's going to be a really great receiver in any system, but I don't think that in the specific perfect system he has that sort of hype ceiling that those guys have. So Chris Olave, he's my number 4. My number 3 is actually your number 5, Treylin Burks from Arkansas. I agree with everything you said. The reason that I have him actually above Chris Olave is, and I will put a caveat to this, I do think he's going to be a little bit more scheme dependent. But like I said, I think in the right scheme, he can be an absolute weapon. He is, I believe, 6'2", 6'3", about that area. He weighs 225, so he is a big receiver. Ended up running a 4.55 40 time, and some people felt a little disappointed by that. Like you said, there was comparisons to DK Metcalf. I thought that was a little bit ridiculous because DK is like one of those guys who looks like he could be the next Randy Moss. I'm not saying he's going to be, but like that's his play style. Burks to me does not feel like that play style at all. He does not feel like the guy that I'm going to send on a streak every play, although he can do that because I think he does have the speed to get away from people. To me, he feels a lot more, and I've seen this comparison a ton, but it's just really accurate. Deebo Samuel, I think that he has that sort of size and build that if you just get the ball in his hands, he can make plays like a running back between the tackles. He can get down and dirty with other players, and he's just going to be bigger than cornerbacks and safeties, that if you can get him past those linebackers in sort of creative ways, he can do a lot of damage. It's not going to be because of electric crazy speed, but his size just puts him above those guys, and he does still have pretty good game speed. Like I said, I know some people were disappointed in his 40 time. I think that in actual game film, he looks a lot faster than a 4.55 40 time. And I think that his speed, sort of unlike Drake London, which is a receiver I know a lot of people are high on, I think that his speed is definitely good enough to get separation, which is still a concern for Treylin Burks, is getting that separation. But if he doesn't get it, he was one of the best receivers in college this past year at 50-50 balls in one-on-one coverage. So I love Treylin Burks. I think that he is going to be a little more scheme dependent than some of these other guys in the class, even guys I have ranked below him. But I think if you put him in the right offense with the right offensive coordinator, he can be an absolute weapon. So that is my number 3. Who's yours?
Before I jump into that, I want to just mention the 40 times, like you said, because I feel like we put up. I think you mentioned this before to me, but I feel like first of all, I think we're putting a little too much stock in the 40s, and I think
Yes.
one of the reasons is because we're seeing all these faster 40s now. But I think that's also because like a lot of people because there's been so much stock put into the 40 time that they trained really hard for the 40. Like I'm not,
Yep.
and so because like you mentioned, some of these guys like the 40 time, even watching the running backs, and we're doing receivers. Times don't really match. Where I'm like, I'm not sure in pads and in the actual game situation. Like, I don't think you were that fast. Or I feel like, man, this guy
Right.
was faster. So I want to throw that caveat out there, because yeah, I do feel like it's not fair to knock because I think Mike Evans ran like a 4.5 ish, and we all know
I
what he
mean,
is.
there's a lot of like these elite NFL receivers, like Hopkins ran I think it was like a 4.62. Cooper Kupp ran in the 4.6 range. Like there's plenty of NFL receivers. Obviously, those guys are a little different because they're elite route runners, but the 40 time, once you actually get to the NFL, is not as important as people think it is.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, people 40 times can be misleading, especially for the skill positions. But anyways, my number 3, I'm going to North Dakota State for Mr. Christian Watson. He wasn't actually going to be my top 5 until my boy Chris Sims put out his rankings last week, because this guy's from North Dakota State. He wasn't even on my radar, but he was in his top 5. I took a look, and also I've been noticing too, been rising up draft boards too. So he might be a guy to watch for round 1. And I do feel he is a first-round talent. In regards to him, I mean, he's fast. I'm just saying this now. Like, gives me a lot of Chase Claypool vibes. And I know that Chase hasn't worked out fully the way I've wanted to, but I think everyone's seen the physical specimen that he is. And honestly, I think he's faster than Chase. I think he has better acceleration. Honestly, I think he's a little more pro-ready than Chase was. Now, granted, one of the knocks, which could prove me wrong down the road, is level of competition. North Dakota State they're the kings of. It's still FCS, right, for them?
I think so.
So they're still like the kings there. But I mean, from what I've seen, I mean, darn good route runner, great with the ball in his hands. Like I said, great acceleration, great release because of his size and just suddenness. It's hard to for people to jam him, and I don't think that's going to be an issue at the next level. And like I mentioned, only knocks I really have for him is low level competition. Could be a concern. And then every now and then he has drops, but granted, he played in a very run heavy offense, so it's not like the NFL where he was getting multiple targets. So I feel like in some situations he would just try to do too much. I don't think it was more like he can't catch. It's just more like he was trying to make a play happen. So he took his eye off the ball and is trying to see what his next move is going to be. And he dropped it because he was trying to do too much, which I think is obviously easily coachable out of him. So he's my number 3 prospect. And like I said, I have a first round grade on him. What about you, John? You already do number 3. Sorry, I gotta do 2.
I already did number 3, so you're at 2 now.
I'm all mixed up. So now I go to number 2. And that's gonna be Mr. Alex Pierce from Cincinnati. I mean, also fast. I think he's maybe a shade. It's tough because of, but I think he's a shade slower than Christian Watson. But I think his acceleration and agility are just much better than Watson's, which is why I have him higher. He has great hands, great adjustment to the ball. One of the main reasons why Cincinnati got as far as they did. I mean, Desmond Ritter's good, but like we both kind of ranked him pretty low. He had good guys around him, and Alex Pierce was one of those reasons. Another guy I've been seeing fly up draft boards. And man, I always say I would love for my Packers to get a hold of him. I'm not saying he's Odell Beckham, but he's very Odell Beckham-ish. That's who I kind of compare him to coming out, with just how fast and fluid he is as an athlete, with the ball in his hands, route running. May not be as good of a route runner or hands as Odell, but it's like just a few notches down. So Alex Pierce from Cincinnati is my number 2 receiver. What about you, John? Who is your number 2 receiver?
For me, at number 2 is Jameson Williams from Alabama. Jameson, out of all the receivers, I think is the most, and it's tough because we didn't get to see him do the NFL Combine, but I think he's the most physically impressive receiver in the draft. 6'2", so he's got the height. He's not necessarily like bulky like Treylin Burks is, but not like super skinny or anything. Not Devonta Smith by any means. Blazing speed, and I think he carries a lot of comparisons, in my opinion, to a lot of the previous Bama receivers that have come out, like Smith, like Jalen Waddle, like just very technically sound wide receiver. Not a lot of things that he can't do, but I think the difference is that he has that sort of game breaking speed. So he feels like, and I don't want to be like too high of praise, but he feels like he's got the sort of speed of a Jalen Waddle in the body of a CD Lamb, which I think is just a really impressive piece about him. So I think he's a home run talent. Sort of just like George Pickens, though he does have the injury concern, which is really my only knock on him. And this is just something that you're going to see no matter where no matter what receiver you are. But I think it's pretty heightened, at least for these Alabama guys, is that they're not going to be able to separate as much as they were in the NFL as they did in college. And so I think that his speed won't necessarily be as game breaking as it was in college, to where he could just run by anyone. But still, I think that he's an absolute burner. And so we'll see what he's able to do. Obviously, it looks like he's supposed to be back by training camp, but Jameson Williams, he is my number 2. And so for number 1, and I'd love to hear your response to this because you have left him off your list entirely.
Wow. Okay. Wait to spill the beans, everybody. Jeez. Go ahead. That's a podcast.
It is. Yeah. Sorry about that. It is Garrett Wilson from Ohio State. Sort of like Breece Hall, but actually even more. I have seen a lot of Garrett Wilson. I got to see him in person actually when he was in high school, because he did play in Austin at Lake Travis. I saw him play in multiple state championship games, which Lake Travis won. But anyway, so I got to see him play in high school, and because he played at Ohio State, a big name school, I watched plenty of Ohio State games, a lot of film on him, and Garrett Wilson just really stands out to me as the most well-rounded receiver in the class. He gives me a lot of Stephon Diggs vibes, honestly. I love his body control. That is the thing that really stands out to me, is he can adjust to any pass. And so I think that no matter what offense he goes to, if he goes to an offense where he has a bad quarterback and he's throwing it behind him, he's throwing it, all these kind of things, his body control is just so elite that if it's on the wrong shoulder, he can make the twist and turn to get to that ball. Has really good speed. He ran a 4.38 40 time at the combine. So he's got really good speed, great route runner. I've seen some people have sort of criticized him because he does this weird sort of jump into some of his routes or into some of his catches. And people are talking about, well, he's going to get lit up in the NFL if he starts doing that. But I don't think it's actually really that big of a concern, because like I said, it's this elite body control that he's able to twist and turn to make catches that other players just simply, I don't think, are going to make. And so I think that his catch radius is almost, and this isn't like scientifically based, so I don't know what his actual like mathematical catch radius is, but it's almost expanded to be similar to some of these longer wingspan receivers because of the way that he's able to manipulate his body. I love his ability to play outside on the boundary near the sideline. So Garrett Wilson, he is my number 1 receiver. Like I said, just really feels like the next Stephon Diggs to me.
All right. Do you want me to say my number 1, or do you want me to say why Garrett Wilson did make my top 5?
Whatever you want to do first.
Keep it relevant in case, we want to cut this up, for editing's sake. So Garrett Wilson didn't make my top 5. I just didn't, besides the route running, which I felt I don't think it was the best of the class, but it was pretty good. It was up there. Besides that, I just didn't see much. There weren't many elite traits that I felt about him. And maybe I didn't really note the body control for catching. And once again, this comes down to preference. I didn't see, I know he ran a good 40 time, but I don't think that matches, at least on the field. And I think my main concern would be physicality. If he gets, I saw it a few times in the Nebraska game. When he gets pressed and jammed, it starts getting a little tougher for him. and especially granted, maybe NFL he may benefit because during the regular season, as far as we know, the pass interference is like candy. They throw it out. But maybe if it's like playoff time or a game where the refs are swallowing their whistles and it's just a physical game, I have concerns about him getting open. And then also with that, like I mentioned, not a lot of elite traits, I feel, especially in regards to speed, agility. So I just feel like there are other guys better with the ball in their hands than Garrett Wilson. That's just how I feel. Obviously, like John mentioned, I could easily be wrong. But yeah, I wasn't too overly impressed with him as I was with everyone else, especially physically, which, I know, like you mentioned, and like others have, sometimes the physical traits they can be great, but they just don't translate. And sometimes it's better to have, the route running and such. So we'll see. But yeah, I felt Alave was better than him. So that's why Garrett Wilson did not make my top 5. But my number 1 receiver,
I will say real quick,
Yeah.
sorry, just to respond. I do agree with your criticisms. The press coverage against bigger physical corners, which you're going to see at the NFL level. I mean, I think of if he faces a guy like Jalen Ramsey, that's something that he's going to have to get way better at the NFL level. And I do agree he wasn't the best route runner in the class. I think he was definitely near the top. But there was a lot of times that I think he sort of relied on like his physical attributes, his speed, his acceleration, whatever it was, to maybe not have the most technically sound route, but just blow by the guy because he was faster than him. But anyway, all the strengths that I mentioned, that's why I had a number 1. Regardless, you do your number 1.
Yeah. So my number 1 is Jameson Williams, like you mentioned. I think he's the best route runner of the class. I think he's also the best with the ball in his hands. Very good at going up and grabbing the ball. Very good at being an aggressive catcher. Just attacking the ball, not letting the defender get it. I mean, so I think 50-50 balls are viable with him. More like with him and Christian Watson, and I would put Treylin Burks there. They're the type of guys where 50-50 balls are more like 60-40, 70-30, really, especially with a good quarterback. Obviously, I think he has great speed, great acceleration. You mentioned that. But he plays with a physicality, too, that I like. Obviously, the ACL tear stinks, but I think we've seen enough guys come back, especially at this time and age, where one's not a concern. Honestly, comp-wise, I think he's a faster, more physical basically more aggressive Amari Cooper. And I know that's high praise. Maybe a little bit less, in terms of size. I'm not sure the measure. I think he said he was 6'2". Not sure. You remember what Amari's
6'1", so he's
okay.
about an inch taller.
About an inch taller. Maybe not be as good of a route runner as Amari was coming out, but Amari is like a generational route runner in terms of that. But I still think the best route runner of the class. And nonetheless, yeah, I'll be interested to see where he does go. Even with the ACL tear, I expect him to go first round as well. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be the first receiver off the board because of that. Because especially some teams, I guess, they don't want to wait a few weeks. I don't know. It's weird.
Just don't let him fall to the Chiefs, please.
It's gonna happen if my Packers are in front of them. I just get a bad feeling. Nonetheless, Buffalo, go get him if the Chiefs are right. Anyways, nonetheless, he's my number 1. I just feel like he's the most surest one. Like if we had to compare it to last year's class, I'd probably put him right behind Jamar. Definitely behind Jamar Chase. I'm not sure if I'd put him ahead of Devontae, I probably would, but if he were healthy, obviously ACL tear, I probably would put him behind Devontae and Jalen Waddle, just for comparison's sake. But obviously, now we know that those 3 guys are pretty good, so that doesn't help. But nonetheless, Jameson Williams is my number 1 receiver. I guess we'll go to considerations. I had Drake London in consideration. He was like 6-ish. It's just, I think you kind of alluded to it, separation. Didn't really do that much in college. Now, granted, he had ankle injuries this last year. But, yeah, I get scared because, like, could he be a Kelvin Benjamin, Or he could be like a Cortland Sutton, a guy who I was also low on because I was like, man, he's not really separating much. But he was so good at just getting enough separation and winning those 50-50 balls enough where, obviously, as we all know, he's a pretty damn good receiver as well. So, those are my comps to Drake London. He was on the outside looking in for me. And obviously Garrett Wilson was right there, 6'7". Like I said, I'm like saying he's bad, but he's right there with me for 6'7", at that range. But yeah, those are my two in considerations. What about you, John?
I just want to say for anyone listening, if they're not in our top five, wide receivers it's so deep. It's so deep. There's always like 10 or 15 receivers that go off in the first 2 days, maybe even more. Like it's just such a deep group at every draft that you're going to get a lot. And it's also one of the hardest positions to really nail down because scheme in college is a big thing for receivers. Because, all of a sudden guys like Tyreek Hill, who had some issues off the field and wasn't really able to be utilized in college, gets
Also,
the
he played
NFL and
running
he's
back,
elite.
so that's
Yeah,
just like sometimes it's just. But go ahead. Sorry.
exactly. So don't think that if they're not in a top five that we don't like them or think they're going to be successful. My honorable mentions, I think Christian Watson is my number 6. I really like him. I almost put him at 5 over, I'm blanking on who my 5th is, over George Pickens. But I just, George Pickens to me has a little bit higher potential, but I do really like him. My biggest concern about him was the Bisons they're very run heavy offense. And so I didn't feel like I was able to see just enough of him to really be like, okay, no matter what team he ends up on, I'm confident that he can really ball out. Like you said, the competition thing, I don't care about that as much as some people. Like I feel like it's a little bit of an overblown thing because if you're looking for specific traits, it doesn't really matter who they go against. But it does matter in some regards to see, are they being challenged by the opponents? And I think honestly, he was just a lot better than the corners that he was playing against. And so it didn't feel like he was never like put under pressure by the opponents to necessarily have to really step up to the moment because he was just better than people. So he was my number 6. Drake London, I'm not very high on him, honestly, in this class. I think that he's a bit overrated. Yes, he's elite at those 50-50 balls and one-on-one coverage, but that's really easy to overcome at the NFL level because you can just throw a safety over the top and it's not one-on-one anymore. And if he's not separating from his corner, those big body corners like a Jalen Ramsey, Richard Sherman's still playing, but I'm trying to think of these tall corners
JC
who are like,
well, or even lanky corners like JC Jackson's like 6'1", but he's got long arms too, so it makes
yeah.
up for he's even though 6'1"
I
is pretty
mean,
good size.
like Trayvon Diggs, like he's 6'1", I believe,
Yeah.
and like corners like that who are these ball hawk kind of guys who are very good in the air. If you can't separate from them, and these are the guys like you said, J.C. Jackson, but Trayvon Diggs specifically, he's a guy who's going to bite a lot, and so you have to beat him with your route running. And if you can't do that and you can't get separation, and you don't have this breakaway speed that when you hit a route you're gone, he's going to be able to get right back on that route and jump the ball. So I do worry about his potential to be able to separate away from NFL corners because he wasn't really able to do it against college corners. Um, Now, that was a big criticism of Michael Pittman, who also is a former USC Trojan, and he's made it work at the NFL level. But I think that Michael Pittman was actually better than it. I think that he was faster than Drake London. And so, yeah, I just worry about Drake London, like you said. I think that he has that floor to be the next Kelvin Benjamin kind of guy that just you're gonna have to fit it into a real tight window. And it's nice that he's big because that window's a little bit larger, but it's still gonna be real tight because I don't think that he's gonna be able to create separation from corners, from safeties, or really be able to hit the soft spots of zones quickly enough to where your quarterback's gonna be able to hit him. So he was still in consideration for me. I definitely would put him probably in my top 8, but there, I just wasn't super high on him. I also considered Johann Dotson. I don't know if you considered him, but
Yeah,
he
he's
had
more of a
parts that I
rover.
really liked,
Mhm.
like his speed. I liked his speed. I liked his route running. I didn't like his 3-cone. His acceleration didn't really wow me. It was actually, I think it was the exact same time as Treylin Burks, and Burks is 3 inches taller, like 30 pounds heavier. So his acceleration didn't really wow me. And at his size being 5'11", his speed is nice, but I think that he's going to have to work on coming out of cuts, stuff like that. But if you get him on some screens where he can just run, then I think that he can be a weapon too. But I've seen some people that are very high on him, specifically a lot of Cowboys fans, which worries me, but that doesn't matter. Anyway.
Yeah, I think like you said, my summation is he's still kind of a raw prospect.
Yeah.
So probably more of a day 2, second, third round kind of guy. So, but wouldn't shock me, like you mentioned, if he's the one that pops out of this class. sometimes it's just you get put in the right circumstance, right coaching, and you excel. So those are our wide receiver rankings for the 2022 draft class.